submitted to me 3 years early for approval. So, just saying. So Jesus, this Jewish rabbi, he is making waves all throughout Israel, and he is on his way to the house of a man whose young daughter is lying sick, and she is on the verge of death. And this man, this father, comes to Jesus, begging Jesus to come to the house to heal her. Now, this is a man that has authority. He is a leader of a synagogue, which is essentially a Jewish house of worship. These Jewish houses of worship could be found all throughout Israel. And so the synagogue leader comes to Jesus and says, "My daughter, this little girl, is dying, and if you don't come, she's going to pass." Now, when the man desperately begs Jesus to come to his house, Jesus agrees, and he begins to go with him. And we're told that there is this massive crowd of people, there's this large gathering that begin to go with him. And the story says that there are so many that they're pressing in on him. And the Greek word that is actually used here for pressing, it literally means to compress, or pressing in on all sides. And so let me give you my definition. Jesus' personal space bubble is being utterly violated, like it is non-existent. They are all around him. They're right there. They're next to him. They're walking right in step with Jesus. And they're constantly keeping their focus on Jesus. And every movement that he makes, they follow him. And they follow Jesus because they have seen or heard about the things that he's been doing throughout Israel. And so they are all around him. And what's fascinating is up to this point, Jesus has this massive following, and he hasn't even been doing this rabbi thing for more than a year. See, rabbis started their ministry at the age of 30. And before the age of 30, they studied, they trained, they listened, they paid attention. They trained under some of the most religious and scholarly of rabbis so that they could then interpret Jewish law. And so Jesus essentially starts his ministry at age 30. It hasn't even been a year yet, and he has this massive following of people. So when Jesus is being pressed on all sides, his popularity, it is off the charts. Now, he hasn't been broadcasting himself on YouTube. He hasn't been posting sermons on his website. Jesus has just been doing his thing. He hasn't been promoting himself. He hasn't even gone into major cities yet. He hasn't even gone into places of power. What he's been doing is he's going into two types of places. The first place is he's just going to these average, ordinary, small villages. The second place he's going to places that the Jews were forbidden to go. So Jesus is taking his 12 disciples into these places that if these disciples' mothers knew that Jesus was taking them into these places, they would have words with Jesus. Now, Jesus is surrounded by people. Have you ever been so close to people that when you turn to the right or the left, like you basically trip over them? That's like life with a toddler, okay? This is where Jesus is at. He's surrounded and he's walking, he's on a mission, and there's all sorts of anticipation and excitement and emotion and energy. And then, amidst all of the people, all up in his space and all around him, he feels something. And it's something that isn't someone accidentally bumping into him. It's something different. He feels power go out from him, and he immediately stops, to which the whole crowd lurches forward and stops and turns around. And then Jesus does something that I heard one pastor say is one of the most profound things in all of the Bible. Jesus turned around. But when he turns around, all he sees is the crowd that's been following him. And even more, all he sees are his 12 disciples, like, "Why have you stopped?" And he sees their confusion. And it's in their utter confusion that he asks, "Who touched my clothes?" Who touched your clothes? To which Peter's then like, "You see the crowd, right? And you're going to ask who touched your clothes? Are you serious?" But then Jesus does something even more profound. It says that he keeps looking around to see who had done it. And what you need to understand is that Jesus already knows who did it. Then there she is. She begins to push through the crowd. And her head is bowed. And as she pushes through the crowd with her head bowed, she falls on all fours on her knees. And she places herself right at Jesus' feet. And her head is still bowed. And as people are looking on, they see that she's trembling. The woman is terrified. The thing about this woman is that this woman has been bleeding for 12 years. Let me put this in honest biological terms. This woman has had this constant, horrific menstrual flow of blood that will not stop. And all the doctors, people who may have been declared magical healers, she's given them all of her money because she's desperate to be healed, but it hasn't come. But here's the deal, though. She's not trembling because she tried to pull a fast one on Jesus or because she's gone about trying to find healing in all sorts of jacked up ways. She's trembling and terrified because she thinks Jesus, a Jewish rabbi, is going to judge and take her by the law. Because according to the law, this woman should be nowhere near Jesus or any other person until this issue is resolved inside of her. She should have isolated herself. She should have quarantined herself. She is not even supposed to be among other people. They had separate rooms for a person like this. And according to the law of Moses, she's unclean. She's impure. She's defiled. And according to the perspective of the Jews, she can't come in physical contact because she would essentially make them unclean if she ever touched them. And even more, according to the perspective of the Jews, she cannot come into God's presence because she's impure, she's defiled, she's unclean, and she can't come in contact with a holy, pure, righteous God. She can't. So she's not allowed in houses of worship, and she's not allowed in the temple. She's not allowed to worship at all. And right now, having touched Jesus, according to Jewish law, she should be stoned and killed right on the spot. And Jesus, a Jewish rabbi, has the authority to pull the trigger right here, right now, in front of everyone. And so she's waiting. And she's trembling. And she is waiting for that first stone to come smack into her rib cage and hit her. And she's scared out of her mind. But in my mind's eye, I envision Jesus crouching and lifting her face so he can lock eyes with her. And he says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." Before Jesus ever spoke these words, and before this woman fell at his feet, before the crowd ever came to a dead stop, it was the moment this broken woman touched Jesus that she was healed. The moment she touched Jesus, Jesus gave her her entire life back. The moment brokenness and guilt and shame came in contact with Jesus, it was transformed into wholeness. And it's interesting, though, because Jesus was not just content with her being physically healed, because he could have just been walking and kept going. He had a job to do. There was this young girl who was dying at the synagogue leader's house, but he stops. He turns around. He can't find her. He keeps looking. He's waiting for her to come forward because he knows who she is already. And he wants to draw her out because he wants to give her something else. Yes, he commends her for her faith. That's important. And yes, he wants to tell her that she's healed and free now. And that was also very important. But above all this, I believe Jesus wanted to totally shift the perspective of herself that she had come to believe. The perspective that she had come to believe by every other person's actions and words towards her. And Jesus did it by saying one word. One word. Jesus preached one word that would have been a lifetime of sermons for any other pastor. And this word hit the deepest level of the soul possible, and it was the word daughter. unclean, busted up, daughter. Impure, defiled, too far gone, daughter. Stay away, don't get too close to her, daughter. She's cursed by God, daughter. If you ever read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you read them all the way through in the Scriptures, these biographical accounts of Jesus' life, you will see over and over and over Jesus going straight into these places and situations where there is an internal battle happening in the soul. A battle where self-rejection or shame or guilt or despair is smashing right into the soul of people. The very soul that God has given you and I. This God defined as love. There is this war happening or has happened in the soul. And it's as this fierce battle is taking place, you and I are doing one of two things. We are either claiming our chosenness and being loved by God, or we are simply believing all the external, cultural, and internal voices and all the things we are told by everybody else. And based on how you respond, that is what shapes your life. That is what shapes your behavior. That is what shapes your action. That shapes how you interact with people, shapes how you interact with your kids, with your spouse, your girlfriend, your coworkers, your friend. When you claim that you are loved and chosen and forgiven by God, it's freedom. There's joy. There's I don't have to perform. Henry Nouwen, one of my favorite all-time writers, he has a book that I read very on in my Christian journey. It's a book called The Life of the Beloved. And this book has always rocked me to the core because it speaks right to this internal battle that is happening within the soul. Nouwen says this. He says, in the midst of this extremely painful reality, this battle, we have to dare to reclaim the truth that we are God's chosen ones, even when our world does not choose us. As long as we allow our parents and siblings and teachers and friends and lovers to determine whether we are chosen or beloved or not, we are caught in this net of suffocating world that accepts or rejects us according to its own agenda of effectiveness and control. And often, this reclaiming is an arduous task. This is a lifelong work because the world persists in its efforts to pull us into the darkness of self-doubt and low self-esteem and self-rejection and depression. And this is because it is an insecure, fearful, self-deprecating people that we can most easily be used and manipulated by the powers that are surrounding us. Last week I shared with you what had happened with a friend, and it's weighed very heavy on my heart, and it's weighed very heavy on my heart all week. Last weekend I got a text from a friend in Michigan who told me that one of my former students, a kid who started in 7th grade, and I saw him graduate, had overdosed on heroin, and that was it. And his life ended. I had no idea. I had not spoken with him for several years, and it just, after we moved to Philly to pastor a church and moved here, we just kind of lost contact, and I had no idea what was going on with him. And his name was Devin. And when he passed away last weekend, he was only 23. Now, people like Devin have always had a very deep place in my heart. Devin was a neighborhood kid who started coming my first year in ministry. And Devin had a golf cart. And he would drive his golf cart loaded with his friends, hanging off the side to come to the youth group. I mean, there was this group of 10 or so kids from the neighborhood, and they had very little experience with the church. Okay? Their parents did not attend. They were rough around the edges. And for many people in my church, these kids terrified them. They didn't know how to talk to them. They didn't know how to engage. And I'll be honest, they were crass. They were rough around the edges. And they drove me crazy. But I love these kids to death because they reminded me of someone. Someone I'm very, very familiar with. Me. They reminded me of me when I was their age. And what I saw in many of them, underneath all the craziness and all the energy and all the roughness, were simply kids like wanting to be loved and affirmed and given attention. And yes, I will tell you, at many points, they drove me nuts and they made me say, "Are you serious?" over and over and over. But I love these kids to death. This is a picture that was taken in 2007, and this describes Devin. I think I told him "Hey, did you just go to the bathroom in the water? Because it's a little warm here." And he just had this huge, just a fun, loving kid. And at some point, during this year, he came in contact with God's love, and he began to claim his chosenness before God. He was in 7th grade, and so it was this simple, real faith. And then he decided to be baptized. And so this week, and I would imagine that right now, you may be asking yourself the same question. Well, what happened, Mike? Between his baptism and now, what happened? What happened from there to here? What happened from there to here is something that happens and is still happening to all of us deep within the soul. When God is saying to us, "Son," we are responding with our voice or with our actions. "I'm not enough." When God says to us, "Daughter," we say, "I'm not worth it." When God says to us, "Son," we say, "There's no way." When God says, "Daughter," we say, "Have you seen this mess?" "Son, I'm a broken man, and none of this can be true." When God says to us, "Daughter, have you seen my life? Have you seen the thoughts that run through my..." You've got the wrong person. When God says, "Son," we are saying, "Get away. You clearly have never seen my past." When God says, "Son" and "daughter," some of us are saying, "You know what? I'll figure this out by myself." This is the internal battle that happens in the soul. And how you respond shapes how you live. Mark chapter 16, what we're about to read, comes at the very end of Mark's account of Jesus' life. Jesus has been crucified. Jesus has been impossibly resurrected. And Jesus has his 11 disciples. One of them had betrayed him and ended up taking his own life. Jesus has them all together, and this is what he says to them. He said to them, "Go into all the world, and preach the gospel." The good news of God's saving, redeeming, transformative love. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. Now that phrase, all creation, has resounded within my heart this week. I can't get away from it. Because all creation, from top to bottom, everywhere, to all people, preach it, share it, live it, go and do it. That God has not given up on people. Share this with everyone you come in contact. Now for some, it's like the gospel that many Christians preach. It seems like a sales gimmick. It seems like we're kind of pushing down a formula and we want you to be religious, and that isn't what Jesus is talking about at all. This is a message about God's saving, redeeming love. Amen. What I've learned about pain over the course of my lifetime and what I've been reminded of this past week about pain is that pain can do two things. It can paralyze you into despair, or it can absolutely reignite a passion inside of you. And so this morning I want to speak to two specific groups of people, and I am part of both of these groups, and I want to do it in a very straight and simple, straightforward manner. To the first group in this audience, people who would say they're followers of Jesus. For the love of God, preach the gospel. And I'm not just talking about with words, and I'm not talking about yelling. Share it. The message of God's redeeming love. Share it with words. Share it with the way you serve people. Share it with the way that you care for people. Share it with those who have been forgotten. Share it with those that you wouldn't sit at the lunch table with. Share it. The gospel isn't a ploy. It isn't a gimmick. It isn't a device so we can make you religious. The gospel is the message that people have a God of love who has been looking for them from the very beginning, and he will not stop until he finds you. Share that. Henry Allen says this: the greatest gift we have to give to other people is the gift of our belovedness. That is all we have to give. That's it. So give it to people. Don't stop giving it to people. Don't stop giving it to one another. A lot of people have this idea that, well, the gospel is shared with people on the outside of the church. No. It is also shared with people on the inside of the church. To the second group of people, and I know you're here. You are loved. You are chosen. Christ has died for you. Christ has been risen for you. And there is nothing that can separate you from the love that God has. And God is waiting for you to reach out in faith. Eminem. Yes, Eminem the rapper. He has this profound lyric in one of his songs. He says this: life ain't no Nintendo game. Life isn't a game. Now, what I'm about to say, I want to say it gently, but I want to be very firm with it. Simply sitting here on Sundays, that isn't reaching out in faith. Reaching out in faith requires this personal choice, this personal decision that says, I am claiming your love, God. I am claiming your forgiveness, and I want to follow your Son, Jesus. That is reaching out in faith. Would you bow your heads? For those of you that desire to reach out in faith, would you just make eye contact with me? For those of you who truly, and I say truly, because it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to do it. For those of you who want to say, I commit myself to sharing the gospel with my entire life, would you make eye contact with me? Father, your desire is that we would all be with you. And the scripture says that you are waiting and that you are patient. And so, God, I pray for my brothers and sisters that there would be an active reaching out in faith. Not just one time, but many times over. God, I pray for the brothers and sisters who have said, I want to commit myself to this. Once again, you know as well as I that this isn't just saying, I'll do it. It's also, now do it. I pray that you would fill them with your spirit. Give them your heart for people, to share it gently not just with words, but also with the way they serve and care for friends and family and co-workers and neighbors. God, we love you. And now we lift you high. Amen.